Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, member the Pharma Guy shares his path from a hard science biomedical degree all the way to pivoting to a master's in management and eventually breaking into a top healthcare strategy consulting firm in the UK. Learn how much he makes now and why he chose to work in strategy consulting over investment banking. Enjoy. Pharma Guy, or the Pharma Guy, thanks for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Thanks for having me.
First off, thank you for being such an incredible member, too. On the site, you've been around for a long time and have an incredible number of silver bananas, so thanks for that.
No problem.
So it'd be great before we kind of get started if you could just give the listeners a quick kind of summary bio.
Yeah, so my background is in biomedical sciences, specifically pharmacology and genetics from what is considered a UK medical target. And then I pivoted to management, again from a UK target, so think LBS, LSE, Oxbridge. And then from there, I kind of dabbled around some healthcare consulting internships, some part-time for a firm that did healthcare due diligence for private equity firms. And then that kind of launched me into just full-time healthcare consulting, so strategy consulting within the pharmaceutical and biotech sectors predominantly.
Great, really interesting. So let's start back in undergrad. So you kind of, well, even further back, kind of just family situation in life. What made you think this is the school? Do you have family in healthcare?
So I actually don't have family in healthcare. So okay. I have a father that's in banking, and I was always fascinated by finance, but it wasn't fully the path that I wanted to go down. Mm-hmm. And I always had a passion for sciences, so I decided, study something you like. But from the very start of undergrad, I had a pretty good idea that research and the corporate side of pharma is not something that I necessarily wanted to do. So I already had it in my mind to go down the kind of pharma consulting route because I knew that was a big sector and there were a lot of firms and there was a lot of work to do. You'll be surprised how little business scientists know and how little science consultants know. So I figured combining the two would have been kind of, that lethal combination that would have allowed me to have success in the sector.
So I know you're only a couple before. What's the punchline? So you're only a couple years out of your master's, but has that been the case? Has it been helpful at all, or you feel like you can get by?
Yeah, no. So it has been. So just from my undergrad class, I was the only one that I know of that pivoted to business, and even within my colleague, let's say class, a lot of people have PhDs or they have masters purely in science, and they came straight into consulting. Mm-hmm. And obviously, within healthcare, having that scientific knowledge helps. But the fact that they miss some of the basic, business and finance kind of knowledge that you would get from a master's in business, master's in management,
right?
I wouldn't say necessarily puts them at a disadvantage, but lets them see things in kind of a myopic way.
Got it. Okay, so fair. So you're in undergrad. You're studying kind of a very science heavy degree. And do you feel at this point you were kind of interested in consulting, you said, like from the beginning, but was it something that you always knew you were going to pivot, or when did that kind of change?
So I was fascinated obviously by the science predominantly, but there was an aspect of the strategy behind pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies that was also very interesting to me, because it's kind of like knowing the science at a high level and then being able to implement that with subsequent business decisions or consequences. And that's kind of what drove me towards the consulting side. You don't want to be too deep into the business, or you don't want to be too deep into the science, and you want to try to find that.
But was there someone at school?
Spot.
Was there somebody at school or somebody that kind of influenced you, or one of your friends that was like doing consulting, or was it something like who exposed you to it initially? What made that light bulb go off? Just your father being in banking was enough?
Yeah, so it was kind of my father who exposed me a bit to business, but it was also a professor who I expressed this interest to, and he said, rather than do the typical master's PhD route, finish your degree as fast as you can, pivot to a business degree, and just hit consulting. And so I started looking up firms and started getting an idea of what they do, and that was really attractive because you wouldn't really leave either field 100%, right? You'd be there in the middle. So I think it was a mixture of that family and that kind of academic environment.
Yeah. So did you feel like when you pivoted, what was the most surprising thing, like going from the hard science degree to then going to a master's in business? I have a guess, but I want to see what you think.
I mean, for me, it was how much you make do with incomplete information. And I think you have a bias coming from science where you want to get all the facts and you want to have a super detailed understanding of a field or an area before you actually make a decision. Or in business, a lot of the time, if you have 50% of the information of a situation, you're lucky, and you have to still make a decision based on that. So I think it was kind of, reconciling the fact that you won't always have the full information. But at the same time, I think there's an element of synergy where both are very fact-driven, and you do kind of tend to drill down on the specific knowledge of an area, and then you use that information to kind of to go forward.
Sure. So you were basically, was it hard to actually get into this master's program? Was it competitive? I mean, I know it's a great school, but was it something that there are a lot of other people with hard science backgrounds kind of going into business? It's probably a little bit more rare. So can you tell me about that and that application process? Was it something you expected to get in, or did you kind of apply to a lot of different places? How did you balance that?
Yeah, so I applied to multiple places, and I think that, I tried to make as much of a case of me being interested in business as I could by showing that I had interests outside of my undergrad and that I was reading business books and so forth. But I think out of 120 in my intake class, there were about 4 people that came from a biomed background. So that's a pretty low acceptance rate for scientists within my field. Obviously, you have your odd engineer here and there, but I'd say STEM subjects as a whole, we're probably within the 10-15% range.
Do you think that's because just there's less of them applying, or do you feel like because the actual yield is lower, like the actual offer rate is lower to scientists? I mean, I would think it's pretty...
I think it's a mix.
Yeah.
I think in the UK, STEM subjects are highly valued, but I think that a lot of STEM people try to at least go down the master's route before pivoting, rather than jumping straight from undergrad to a master's. So I think, I think it's a combination of low number of applications and potentially just low offers.
Okay, so you put together a strong enough application that you got accepted to a really strong school. You ended up going there for your master's, and you were kind of shocked. Okay, one of the things, science versus business, you have to make decisions. So was it a lot of like casework and stuff there? Like in clubs and stuff like that? Or in groups?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of collaboration, and there was a lot of kind of rapid fire work and kind of case exercises. Even within certain courses, it was kind of the standard coursework, where in science I was used to doing maybe 3-4 month long lab projects, and in business you'd have 1-2 week cases where you essentially have to come up with something.
So did all the top consulting firms come to the school to recruit, or how was it a 1-year program, a 2-year program? What was the kind of timeline so that you would have to get ready for recruiting? Because consulting case interviews are notoriously difficult. So I'm curious how you prepared in terms of, were you doing a lot of mock case interviews with your classmates? Did you have like an internship in between your first and second year, or was it straight away recruiting and then your work after your first year?
Yeah, so my course was kind of an oddity within the school. It was one of the few 2-year courses that's offered. So it gives people a chance to kind of either have a summer internship between the 2 years, or to try and get some sort of off-cycle internship.
That's great.
So you do have heavy recruiting from the top banks and the top consulting firms in both years. But the majority of us ended up getting summer internships. I ended up at a strategy boutique that focused on healthcare between my 2 years. And then come the success of September, that's when full-time recruitment started.
What was that boutique you ended up at? Was that like your first choice? Did you try applying to like the top consulting firms, or what? What do you think? Did you have any crazy interview experiences during that time?
Yeah, so I think, I kind of like everyone in that position, you apply to all the firms, kind of half interested, half not. But I was very interested, I think, after my internship to focus on the healthcare sector. So I was actively looking specifically for healthcare consulting firms. And the firm that I applied to, interestingly, I applied to the summer before for an internship, and I didn't make not even first round interviews.
Right.
And then I ended up getting the first round interview, passing that second round interview, and then right before Christmas an offer. So that was pretty particular.
And tell me a little bit about like what the interview process was like. Was it a traditional case interview, or was it different because it was so niche focused in healthcare?
So yeah, so the firm they predominantly hire straight into the healthcare sector. So we have a bunch of different practices, and you get hired straight in. So you don't start as a generalist, even though it's quite a big firm, about 1,000 people around the world. The interview process was, I think, potentially unusual in that you have the opposite to what you would have in normal cases. So you would have a super day at the beginning as round one, where you'd be in groups of 6, 7 people, and you'd circulate around different exercises. So a mixture of case, a mixture of behavioral, a mixture of competency questions. And then
Wait, you're in groups. You're in groups of other candidates, or you're in groups meaning you're getting interviewed by 6 or 7 other people.
No, you're in groups of different candidates. So
And you're having to do like a group interview.
Exactly. So you'd have a
awkward.
group interview, and you would essentially rotate. Not only so you'd be with a fixed group of 6, 7 people, but then you'd rotate with like 5, 6 different partners at the firm, and they'd each ask you a different. They'd each pose you a set of questions. So again, cases, competence, brain teasers, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you pass that, you would move on to round 2, where it would be 3 rounds of one-on-ones, where you would have 2 cases and 1 set of competency questions.
So let's go back to the super day, the group dynamics. How did you navigate that? What did you feel like was important were you able to prepare for that at all? I guess some of the work you do in your master's probably helps with that, but it's kind of a different dynamic when so much is on the line, right?
Yeah, it is. And I think you can prepare for the traditional cases, as one would. But at the same time, you have various exercises that you wouldn't expect. So one exercise was everyone was given a card with a word to do with a value. So someone would get integrity, someone would get honesty, someone would get weakness and strength. And you'd have to kind of try to answer, when was the time you showed honesty? When was the time you showed integrity, and so forth? I ended up getting the integrity card, which turned out to be the hardest one out of the bunch by far. But yeah, it was definitely an experience where it's tough to kind of navigate within a group of people. Because
what did you say for the integrity? So like you got the integrity card, you had to come up with a story or a time that you showed integrity.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you think of one on the spot, or were you prepped? Were you ready?
So I kind of winged it on the spot. So I used to work part-time in nightclub promotion, and I was talking about how in that field you very often get clients taken from you and clients stolen around, and as a proof of integrity, I would never steal other people's clients because I knew that down the line that would come back to bite me in the ass. And those who did ended up getting fired by management pretty often 3-4 months after they started doing that. So I demonstrated that, and evidently that resonated with people.
Okay. Fair enough. So you pull the tough card, you survive it, and then kind of you make it to the other rounds, which there's more traditional case interviews, right?
Correct,
and then
yeah.
did anything throw you off? Was there any case you remember that was like surprisingly difficult?
No, I don't think it was surprisingly difficult. I think, the case itself, the first case was predominantly, one of those profitability questions. Company wants to open X activity in this sector, and they want to be profitable within 1 year. How would you go about doing so, or analyzing that? Mm-hmm. But I think what threw me off a bit was that the market sizing was very, let's say, abnormal in terms of the sector. So I remember I got a case about the market size for ankle braces in the UK, and that was something that I had never even remotely thought of. and different variations within that sector that you could think about to kind of calculate a market size. So that was a bit awkward.
Ankle bracelets?
Ankle braces.
Oh,
so
braces.
When
Okay.
people,
Got it.
yeah, so when
Yes.
people get
Okay.
injured or
Got it.
yeah,
Like, yeah, braces, like air casts and stuff like that.
correct,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So, okay. Tell me a little bit about what happened. So you did the internship. Was it something where it was expected after the internship you'd receive a full-time offer for once your master's degree was completed? Or how does it,
Yeah,
what was the retention or the offer rate on the interns that did end up getting the job?
yeah. I was with two other interns. So they took three interns out of, I think, a couple hundred applicants, and the offer rate was essentially 100%.
Okay.
However, the firm where I interned was a boutique, which is not necessarily bad in itself. It's just that within the areas of strategy that they advertised, they were heavily focused on one where 90+% of the revenue was coming from, which was a very interesting area. However, the repetitiveness, down the line, maybe something that some people aren't attracted to, and therefore I looked for a firm that had a more varied offering after a while.
That's fair. And so did you feel like, well, so you did receive an offer from them though to come back
Yeah,
full time? And so
yes,
did you,
yeah. So I received an offer.
and so did you have to tell them right away, like no, or did you say, oh, I need to think about it and then kind of go to start
Yeah, so
recruiting
it's
or?
one of those things where, the place is there, let's chat after the summer, see how you feel about things. And then I very politely, I thanked him for the time, I thanked him for the opportunity because it was a very strong learning opportunity. But then I mentioned that there was more that I wanted to achieve at this early stage of my career,
Hmm.
and I was looking for other opportunities.
Did they seem upset or did it seem they were nice about it?
No, I think that they were nice about it because, I mean, a boutique that focuses on one sector, the churn rate was pretty high where you'd have people leave maybe every couple of years.
Hmm.
And they understand that the learning experience in the moment is very strong, but then people want to bring that learning somewhere else. And I kind of realized that straight after the internship.
Okay. And so you kind of go into your second year, you don't have a full-time offer locked down. It's a little bit nerve-wracking. Did you have confidence that you could just get through I mean, you obviously did a great job to get that first internship. So was it that confidence to kind of turn down that offer just that you felt like you were gonna land something? Is that kind of how what your mindset was?
I mean, yeah, I never walked into any situation thinking I'm 100% going to get this offer, right? But it was one of those situations where I said, I have this experience. I'm going to leverage it as much as I can.
Hmm.
And especially within the sector, if I can push it as hard as I can and try to sell myself as well as I can can for sure get a first round interview. And then from there, it's up to me. So I tried to push as much experience that I could. I tried to learn as much as I could from the internship.
But then how did you do that?
And
So
then,
you got back onto campus and like, had you been networking over the summer as well? Like, had you been
so
reaching
no,
out
I
and
was
talking to
kind of,
people?
yeah, I was pretty kind of isolated to the firm where I was interning, but I was getting an idea of other firms within the sector that were operating in, the similar strategy avenues and what they were doing.
Got it.
So I had more names. And then from there, I could just do more applications through the website themselves. I did network a little bit in other areas,
Yeah.
but I think it was mainly just applying straight up through the websites and the online application portals.
What was your hit rate on those? Like from, let's say so it sounds like you maybe applied to, I don't know, 30 places.
Yeah.
Not that many.
So I'd
It's
say,
not like you applied to 300 places. You were fairly targeted. It was a specific niche. It was in consulting. So like you knew what you wanted, right? And you had the right resume for it, right?
yeah,
So,
exactly.
so
So
you,
I'd say out of pure healthcare strategy firms, I must have applied to about 7, 8.
okay.
And then from there, about 2 interviews and one converted to a full-time position.
Yeah. See, that's what I'm saying. Like you didn't have that much large of a universe, right? So
No,
what would you
no,
have,
that's the thing.
what would you have done if you had gone 7-0 or 7-1-0, meaning 7 interviews?
So
What would you have done?
Yeah, so I mean, I also applied to other firms at the same time because
Got
I
it.
figured this is the sector that I want. However, I'm not going to take that risk fully, and I'm going to
Got
try
it.
and broaden my scope. So I did apply to some generalist firms.
And you were
I
getting
did apply
interviews
to
from
some.
there? And you were getting some interviews there as well?
Sorry.
You were getting interviews at the generalist firms as well at a decent rate?
Yeah, so I got a few of the generalist firms. I got a couple of IB interviews for
Mm-hmm.
mainly healthcare firms, so healthcare focused firms, let's say.
Yep.
But there again, because my focus was in consulting, I didn't necessarily put that much time and effort into developing those financial skills. So some of those fell through at the interview stage with banks, and also just the conveying of interest. Every time I discussed my interest, it came across very strategy side rather than more finance side. So people said, you're a good candidate, but you seem like you would flourish a lot more in consulting.
So do you feel like it's like you were hedging your bets with some of these investment banking applications, but you weren't fully vested in prepping and doing the prep work because you really did want that strategy consulting role?
Correct. Yeah. It's just, I
Like
don't
you
know.
weren't
I
you
mean,
weren't fully into it because you probably could have done the research to know what it would take to do well in an investment banking interview, right? And said what you needed to say.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
interesting to me because you were kind of dabbling so it sounds like obviously your first choice was strategy consulting healthcare. Your second choice was just consulting, and your third choice was like IB, or
Yeah,
sort of.
correct.
So like you kind of had a better story probably for the consulting firms, obviously, than for the IB. IB was kind of like you just got flamed out. Like they sniffed you out in the interview process. Sounds like and it probably didn't help that.
Exactly.
So like tell me a little bit about that. Like was it just something you applied just because you could and you came from a strong school, so you figured I should do this? Like it was almost like I should just to hedge my bets.
Exactly. It was kind of that. And then, when you do get to the interview stage, it's one of those moments where you're like, oh shit, I didn't think I'd get here. And then when you're in the interview, you try to convey yourself as much as you can for that interest of IB and so forth, but it comes across on a more strategic level from a kind of a consultant perspective, and people kind of just they figure it out there and then.
Like his
They're like,
technicals, were
you could
you
do
dropping the ball on like the three statement models to walk me through DCF, that type of stuff? Was that
no. So some of those things are kind of there because I mean, based on my background, whenever I approached interviews, they wouldn't drill me as hard as they would someone with a finance background. Because they said,
got
this
it?
guy's done biomedical sciences,
Right.
then he's done management, so obviously his technicals won't be on point.
Okay, so it's
But
just
it's
how you
more
were
about
framing
why
it.
IB.
Yeah, it was okay. Why IB, and it didn't come. It came across as more. It sounded more like why consulting strategy.
Exactly. It would always be muddled up with why strategy, like why strategy consulting. They were like, all right, you're clearly not fully in this. You should push for consulting more.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. Well, they were right. So, so you
Yeah,
so
correct.
okay. So why consulting? Was it more just this professor, his influence on you, kind of early on, going back there to? Did you feel like it just fits you better personality wise? I'd like to kind of unpack that a little bit just for the listeners who maybe aren't really sure. Should I go investment banking? Should I go strategy consulting? What do you think made you a better fit for that side?
Yeah, so I think it was partly my personality, and again, for all the listeners out there, my experience and my opinion is predominantly based within the healthcare sector. Is that when I do still follow a lot of these big deals that happen in healthcare, but from the investment banking side, it can be a very iterative process within the realm of healthcare and biotech where similar strategies are applied time and time again with M&A or with fundraising and so forth. But within the strategy, there's so much detail within pharma and biotech that is often overlooked that you tend to deep dive into when you do strategy consulting, that the day-to-day nature of projects and the day-to-day nature of tasks is, in my opinion, more varied. And it also, you get to the level of granularity where you're not necessarily dealing with the C-suite who has a very high-level overview of the whole situation. You're dealing with, the head of market access for oncology. You're dealing with the head of commercial planning for rheumatology. So you're going deep within the strategy, but also deep within the science. And someone who comes from a scientific background has managed to combine this with business, on the day-to-day, that is a more interesting and varied kind of set of tasks.
Compared to banking, where you say it's more transactional and it's like a repetitive M&A process with where you're just you come in, you do a transaction, you leave. Is that what you're in comparison? Is that what you're referencing to?
Correct. And again, coming from a consulting background, I'm not incredibly familiar with the day-to-day of investment banking within the deal process, but also based on research that we get from our clients, where they've dealt with transaction strategy teams or they've dealt with M&A teams from banks. A lot of the work is kind of more high level, where instead we deep dive into the strategy a bit more.
Yep, that's fair. I don't think many people would argue with you on that. So tell me, like, looking back, you've only been out a couple of years. What would you have changed anything? Would you still have gone the very hard science degree, given that the amount of work it took to get? Because it can be a tough degree.
I think it was tough, but I think yes, because it gave me that let's say entry level understanding of science that is necessary, and we have a lot of people within the realm of strategy consulting that can go all the way to the PhD level and then pivot to consulting. And realistically, on a day-to-day basis, you don't use all that knowledge and all that experience. So there you spend a larger portion of your life on the science when you could have pivoted to the business and learned some more tangible skills that you're going to use on your day-to-day. So I think going back, I would have repeated the same path.
Okay, great. And then what's next for you?
So I think right now I'm loving strategy consulting within healthcare. I think I'm going to stick to this. I am fascinated by the side of private equity and so forth, and obviously coming from a non-financial background, but being exposed to some commercial due diligence deals and so on, there is that potential to pivot, but I need to try and market the angle from a more strategic side, try to help companies or help PE firms understand that there is a level of complexity within the strategic side of transactions and deals that needs to be addressed from a consultant perspective rather than a purely financial perspective.
And there's also operating partners as well in private equity.
Correct.
I would encourage you to look at that path as well, because it can be very lucrative and interesting too. You get to work a little bit deeper with specific companies. But do you mind sharing pay by any chance, or a range of pay that you had kind of coming from, well, I guess just you had your internships, but just coming out of school? Is it like is there a certain range that you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, so the starting at my firm was a little bit above market, I'd say, for what one would expect from an entry-level consulting role. The range was between, let's say, 47 and 53.
Okay.
So that's a pretty comfortable range considering London standards and considering that, a background with a similar educational background with me at, a tier 2 or an MBB would get within the 40 to 45 range.
Yeah, that's great. It's a pretty solid first year out of school salary, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
Congrats. So, awesome, man. Well, first off, or not first off, but just to wrap up, just again, thank you for taking the time, and thank you for being such a valuable member to the community. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining, man. And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.